Dear guests. Hello, I am the avatar of the ZKM Karlsruhe.
Welcome to the cultural matinee here at the representation of the state of Baden-Württemberg.
We are delighted that you are here today.
We, that is to say the Center for Art and Media Karlsruhe,
And the Staatliche Kunsthalle Baden-Baden.
Is interlocalism the new internationalism?
That's the topic for discussion today. I would now like to introduce our panelists.
Alistair Hudson, Çağla Elke, and Misal Adnan Yıldız.
But now the stage is free for our hosts.
It's a blending light here. Okay. Dear Secretary of State, Anne Braun, dear Miss Elke, dear Mr. Hudson, dear Mr. Yıldız, dear Ms. Buhr, dear members of the German Parliament, ladies and gentlemen, dear guests joining us online. It's a really great pleasure to welcome you here at the Landesvertretung Baden-Württemberg and online to this inspiring cultural matinee. Baden-Württemberg is proud of its multifaceted and innovative cultural scene, and today's event is organized by two of the most important cultural institutions in Baden-Württemberg, namely the ZKM in Karlsruhe situated and the Kunsthalle Baden-Baden. I really want to thank Mr. Alistair Hudson, Director of the ZKM in Karlsruhe, and Çağla Elke and Misal Adnan Yıldız, Directors of the Kunsthalle Baden-Baden, for joining us here at the stage representation of Baden-Württemberg in Berlin. The topic for which we have gathered here today is both current and fascinating, is interlocalism, the new internationalism. Technology has seamlessly connected us across diverse geographical regions and cultures, breaking down the barriers of established national boundaries. In this time, we find ourselves amidst a fascinating transformation. New regional cultural arenas are emerging, challenging the prevailing homogeneous internationalism of major urban cities. And isn't it a reflection of our time that local cultures and economies directly exchange ideas and products without the conventional detour through metropolitan hubs? Our esteemed guests will explore how cultural landscapes in regions are evolving into significant laboratories for art and science. Together they will shed light on new perspectives and pathways for collaboration with communities worldwide. Last but not least, I would like to point out that Ms. Elke will be curating the German pavilion at the Venice Biennale next year, and we might be able, perhaps, to catch a glimpse of her ideas for the curation today. I'm looking forward to gain new insights from the discussion and to hear about the vision for a future where interlocality shapes our understanding of culture, creativity, and cooperation. Thank you very much for joining us for this inspiring matinee, cultural matinee. Thank you very much.
Good morning. My first speech in English. I hope so. It will. Yes. Dear State Secretary Rudi Hochfried, hello Rudi. Thank you for the introduction and thank you for hosting us today here. Dear Alistair Hudson, dear Çağla Elke, dear Misal Adnan Yıldız, dear Elke Buhr, dear members of the Bundestag. I would also like to welcome you on behalf of the Ministry of Science, Research and the Arts here in the Baden-Württemberg State representation in Berlin. A warm welcome to you all here as well as in front of your screens. What a great day for culture made in the land. I must say that I'm extremely proud that not one, not two, but three heads of our finest cultural institutions, the ZKM in Karlsruhe, the Kunsthalle Baden-Baden, are united together here in the Baden-Württemberg state representation in Berlin to discuss the trade-offs between local and global. Our humble regional contribution to the internationally well-known Berlin Art Week. Revisiting interlocal exchange, setting up barrier-free communication, stripping off old habits. This matinee is dedicated to thinking out of the box. The format of today's discussion is inclusive and open. We are streaming live. Our panelists have several things in common. They are well-established, award-winning curators. Their approach is very contemporary with a focus on inclusion and collaboration. Their understanding of the arts and cultural production is open and welcomes participation. They were not born in Baden, but they work in Baden, part of Baden-Württemberg, part of the land. Çağla and Misal Adnan Yıldız have both been very successful as co-directors of the Kunsthalle Baden-Baden. As a distinction for this visionary work, Ms. Ilk has been selected to represent Germany at La Biennale di Venezia in 2024. Alistair Hudson, ZKM's new director, has repeatedly emphasized how interested he is in conversations between communities in all different sorts of settings. Baden-Württemberg features these settings, big or small, vibrant cities and dynamic towns, as well as unique rural areas. Creativity and innovation come in all these sizes and forms. This treasure has to be lifted even in the remote areas. You, dear panelists, will now be discussing interlocalism and the role of technology for connecting communities, people, and ideas, a topic that is not only relevant in culture, but crucial for the future state of our currently fragile societies. I'm very much looking forward to an active discussion and new insights on how the arts can once again be a frontrunner and enabler in defining new ways of open and inclusive communication. I would like to thank Secretary Hochfliet and the Kulturbeirat of the Baden-Württemberg State Representation for their continuing support, as well as its team for hosting the event. I would like to thank Helga Huskamp of ZKM and her team for the idea and the conceptual work, as well as everybody at Kunsthalle Baden-Baden and Monopol magazine in helping to make this wonderful event happen. I'm delighted to welcome such distinctive guests to the podium today. Please welcome Alistair Hudson, Çağla Ilk, Misal Adnan Yıldız, and Elke Buhr. Thank you.
Hello and good morning. Thank you for the nice introduction. I may present myself just very shortly. I'm Elke Buhr, Chief Editor of Monopol magazine, and this talk will be streamed on the website of Monopol and also on the website of ZKM. So I'm saying hello to everybody here in the room. Thank you for coming in this busy week, which is really, really, really nice, because I know how many things are happening, but no wonder that you're here, because we have a really interesting and great panel. And so I just may very shortly introduce a little more in detail the panel to you. To my left is Misal Adnan Yıldız. He's a curator, educator, and writer. He studied psychology and visual arts, and also also architecture. And I think that's an interesting combination: psychology and visual arts. Maybe Gestaltung, yes. And he has served as artistic director at Kunsthalle Stuttgart and other international institutions, and curated exhibitions at many prestigious institutions, biennials, and art fairs internationally. And now he is a co-director of Staatliche Kunsthalle Baden-Baden, together with Çağla on the left. She is an architect, dramaturg, and curator. She has studied in Berlin and Istanbul also, and works really transdisciplinary between urbanistics, theater, performance, and visual arts. And here in Berlin, she is well remembered for her work at Maxim Gorki Theater, where she has been responsible for the Herbstsalon Festival, among many other things. And we have already heard she's working on the German pavilion of the Venice Biennial, and I know she won't tell us one word about it. Sorry to say that. But yeah, maybe she surprises us. And she is a co-director of Staatliche Kunsthalle Baden-Baden, as I said. And then in the middle, Alistair Hudson. He has worked internationally as a curator and museum director. Among many other things, he served as a director of 2 museums in Manchester. And since 1st of April, he is leading ZKM Karlsruhe, which is one of the most prestigious art institutions in Germany, and one that sometimes seems to be more famous even abroad than here. So we want to talk about what it means for cultural region, for cultural institution to work in the region, to work in Baden-Württemberg. And this is not a simple question, because, well, Kultur ist Ländersache. If you try to translate this sentence into English, the artificial intelligence will say culture is a national matter. That was actually the translation. And I was very happy about that, because I'm always happy to see artificial intelligence fail, because I want to keep my job. So, so the interesting thing is that in Germany, culture is not it's a national matter, but it's not mainly a national matter. It's funded by the regions, by the Länder. And so I think to talk about this relationship between center and periphery in Germany might be a little different than in other European countries. But still, the centralization also in Germany is obvious. I mean, the art scene is very much centered in Berlin, and it is different to work in the region. And so maybe the first thing, just to start very, very basic, is if you could just describe us how it is to work from this point where you are. Maybe Çağla wants to start.
Yes, I remember in former conversation how we have done the dramaturgy, so yeah, I will start. I think it's important to tell that it is actually a very important decision. If you are working in the big capital cities and the hubs, then you are like in Berlin, in the city that we are now in, and we are having Berlin Art Week, and it's full with events. And in the, I would not say in the periphery, but in smaller cities or other spaces like Baden-Baden, there are so many institutions, but actually the activities are not as so much. And I think it was a very important decision for us to go there. Because in Berlin, after doing Berlin Herbstsalon and Adnan doing so many international directorships, we were very pretty clear that we don't want to be in the center. And we believe that if we go and do something which we want to move and do it somewhere else where it makes maybe more sense than doing it in a center, then we will be more free. And it has also something to do with the like this gives you also more power, like you don't have the pressure of the audience, pressure of the politics, and you feel like, okay, here the landscape is, and where we are, it's actually not the most, like it's a bit conservative area when I might articulate. So it's not Berlin, it's Baden-Baden, and I think this moment of taking the decision, going there with a vision, is very important, and take this opportunity and see this as an opportunity of empowerment. So this was actually why we went to Baden-Baden and continuing on changing the cultural landscape in Baden-Württemberg.
Alistair, Hudson, can you relate to this freedom thesis? Is that also what you feel? Do you feel that you're more free than if you were in London or Berlin?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I've worked in both. I've worked in cities and in regions, and I always find you can get away with doing more experimental things outside of the cities because the heat, the spotlight is less somehow. There's still important institutions, but there isn't that pressure that comes with metropolitan institutions that has, the way the board is constructed, the history of the institution, the way it's seen by its public. It's very different. And I think particularly in places like Karlsruhe and Baden-Baden, there's a different kind of relationship with the people around it. In a way, it's much more intimate. And that change, that difference in relationship between people who, you see on the street every day, or you meet in the supermarket, or, in your day-to-day life, in these smaller environments, the relationships are different, and that changes the way you work. And it's very different than when you're in a large, august institution. Although ZKM is huge. It's ridiculously huge for the size of Karlsruhe, but that's also a great kind of contradiction as well that I like, yeah.
But that's interesting that you feel that you can be more experimental in those places, because I would have thought that it's more difficult to be experimental because people are not used to maybe avant-garde art, or they're having troubles in kind of getting into new things. How do you feel that?
I mean, you need to engage with your audiences, and you need to develop audiences in each context. So, of course, you have a ready-made international crowd and contemporary art culture in a metropolitan context. But also, it's limiting you with the way how audiences are circulated. So, I think I would be more interested in thinking about this within the pandemic process. We got appointed exactly in the beginning of this process when the exhibition space lost its relevancy, when the institutions had to change. We need to question the online thing from the beginning. I mean, we were not prepared. Our website was not prepared. Nothing was prepared. So this physicality of being together in an art object, we missed that a lot. So all this process, when we consider this together, I would just go back to my roots and listen to my grandmother. When you go to another context, she's concerned about my health, and she always advises, eat the onion and garlic which grows in that earth, in that soil, in that land. So that will really give you good immunity. So I think eat the onion and the garlic from where you live.
And how is how's the garlic in Baden-Württemberg? Is it good?
Çağla is our gastro expert.
Okay, but to get maybe a little better idea, I mean, you both, it started more or less recently, it's not so long, like how, you had the problem of the pandemic, but how do you approach such a public? I mean, you come there, you don't know anyone more or less? I mean, who did you know in Baden-Baden? And then how do you do this? Like, how do you approach the public? Because I know also when people come from abroad and there's a new director, maybe people are first a little suspicious and they think, will they like our place? And so how was that experience?
I think we started speaking another language and nobody understood it. I always felt like we need a dictionary to transmit what we are thinking because it's not only one director, it's two directors, and we don't name ourselves also co-directors, we say directors because co always also has kind of a hierarchy. And we tried to open up the space as much as possible. It was only possible because we didn't have the digital connection, so we immediately made the analog connection, and the idea was that we don't come alone, but we come with a team and artists. So the idea was to implement the artist studio in an institution, so we came and come with other artists who take time also to be with us in the city. So I think so we were not only two, we were more. And the artists stayed there, make connections, and they come regularly. And that was, I think, interesting to make more connections to the city. So they have different elements of the program. So I think that was important as a translation. So we were not the only ones who were speaking something different aesthetically and contextually, but artistically. So the audience is more convinced from the art. And the house was also very named for the avant-garde movement. So I think we had this tradition behind us, which we could also connect to this tradition. And which Adnan didn't mention, we try to also put our archive, what happened there, to connect with the audience, like this happened here. We are not doing it new. So we try to also show the history of the house to the audience, what they have already experienced, and we are connected to this tradition. I think these are the small gestures how you can connect with the locality, even though we had no connection with Baden-Baden. I first heard the name when Emeka Okbo called me in 2017. I can't show the work in Hapsalon because I'm showing in Baden-Baden.
You were like, where?
Where? And I was like, how come we cannot show one work because it's in Baden-Baden? We are in Berlin. So this was, I think, how I want to connect to the art world and our interconnectivity. Like, what does it mean to be local, and how can art go beyond, actually, the borders? How can we think more non-territorial? Like, it's not only the states, cities connects us, but also our methodologies and art pieces. So instead of connecting, shutting is, for me, really a problem. So it was the idea that we have kind of a net, as we have from Thomas Saraceno, like that we see the analog spaces we are in, and from there, through the art and the connections, become the center of the world each. So I think this was our idea when we came. That's why we are working on that still.
Alistair, how do you feel like how did this work to get to know Karlsruhe for you? Like, how did you start these connections?
Well, I mean, it's like when you move somewhere anyway. You go out and meet people and say hello, and secondly, you invite people in.
Yeah.
And invite them around like you would as any person living anywhere. And of course, this takes time, and it's relatively new for me, but I certainly spent the first few months going out and meeting the neighbors, and also then inviting the neighbors to, one by one, into ZKM as well, and also people who didn't ordinarily come. So we had, we had an open day recently, the Kommune Night, where all the museums are open in the city. And as part of that, we invited community groups to come in and have a conversation. So I think it's really about changing the dynamic of the way people see an institution. And for me, what's really important is it's not just the normal art people that come, that you invite and encourage multiple uses of a space. I'm interested in, our cultural institutions being used for the broadest idea of what culture is, for scientific reasons, for healthcare, for exercise, for education. And then once it becomes ingrained as a place that is part of people's daily lives, it then starts to have a very different atmosphere and relationship with its local communities. And that's something quite different than a city center, a metropolitan center museum, where they're so tied to expected codes of behavior and find it very difficult to break out of that. And it was interesting last night that a colleague I know who works at one of the larger Berlin institutions said, we're relying on you to do something really different because we need that influence to change our city center institutions, because we don't do it so fast or so quickly. We have to borrow from these other places in order to change our big metropolitan institutions. But I think the regional places are very much where you can do what you want. And I was very delighted by, when I was recruited, that I was very much told, you can really do what you want with this. There isn't...
Nice.
which is very nice. It's great. And I also think in terms of regionality, this is very interesting as well, because there's enormous will in the region. You know, there's regional pride, and they want Baden-Württemberg to be something different and be a player in the world. And if you're always doing that, you know, looking in the mirror to Berlin, for example, you're not going to have necessarily the same confidence. But if you start to develop things that you're well known for in your own right, I mean, for example, in the tech industry, then suddenly you change the way the place is seen, and you have a different kind of relationship with other geographies in the world. And I think this is you know, also what you're saying is how I feel as well, is that now with technology, it's really possible to have these relationships with other places that are equally interesting and trying to do the same things, but without the usual routes of communication. You can, and especially we all learned in lockdown how to talk with you know, villages in the Congo, or with projects in, you know, eastern Ukraine, or, you know, nowhere was out of bounds. And that really changes the dynamic of how somewhere like Baden-Baden or Karlsruhe can operate in the world. Really dramatically changes that. So I think that is very exciting. And it means, and just to add to what was said before about this idea of the language of avant-garde art, yes, that's sometimes difficult in places that aren't cities of the same kind where contemporary art normally thrives. But also, avant-garde contemporary art is also really conservative.
Right.
Sometimes it's more conservative than the places we describe as being conservative. So that means is if you don't do contemporary avant-garde style art in somewhere like Karlsruhe, and you do something else, it can be both. It can both speak to the people who live there because it's specifically targeted, but it also speaks back to the art system to say, don't keep doing the same old things. You can work in other ways, with people in different ways.
Mm. But how do you do that? Like, how do you find new formats that might invite other kind of people into your institution?
In our role, from the beginning also for me, and I adore Çağla with sharing this approach, we depart from artistic practices. For us, we learn from artists. Also, I learned curating from the artists. So our perspective as an institution is extended with their research and perspective. Just a little note on the context of Baden-Baden. We have a tiny little river leaking and sometimes streaming through the year. And from site-specific projects to the selection of some works, that is a leitmotif in the whole program, that we live with water, we breathe with water, and in a world of transition today, we understand how it's important for our healing. So I think when you need to connect with a context, you also need to connect with yourself. You need to develop these tips from your own cosmology, that this crash between different cosmologies can help. So in that sense, it's always coming back in our context from one of the first commissions. Janssen Werner literally inserted a microphone in the river that people could hear it in different frequencies. But also we imagined a boat by Grada Kilomba in the same place. So I think we are interested in extending our imagination with the artists. So we learn from them, we rely on them, and so from the beginning we defined this house strongly as an artist house.
Mm-hmm. And Alistair, Hudson, what you just elaborated about what you think a museum should be, that would be what you define as a useful museum, right? Could you maybe explain that a little more?
Yeah, I'll try and be as concise as I can. Well, for me, basically, in the long story of art, of 40,000 years of human history, art was always in use in societies, in ritual, in religion, in daily life. It's really the only last 200 years we invented this idea of the art object as we know it now, and exhibitions and galleries and museums in the way that we understand them now. And what that did is it created an understanding of art purely based around spectatorship, essentially around spectatorship, which is about looking at objects, connoisseurs dictating what people looked at, of a set of behaviors, which is about when you engage with art, you go to a room with things arranged in it, and you have some kind of experience. I mean, I'm simplifying here. But for me, that's very much wrapped up in, you know, a kind of Eurocentric, you know, industrial economic machinery of our recent history in the West. And that is now changing. That world is now changing, where the world is opening up in many different ways. We all know our culture is no longer at the center of things. So we have to think and behave in different ways that's more apt for the way the planet is now. And so for me, what that means is we have to think about our institutions again and reimagine them for this new landscape that we're in. And for me, what that means is art is actually more important than just being something you go and look at. Art is actually a way of doing things in the world. And the sadness, although, you know, there's a wonderful art history that I enjoy, exhibitions and, you know, the history of Western art and so on as well. But there's a wonderful liberation in thinking about art as a process that everybody should be applying to everything in life, from politics to economics to cookery, you know, garlic. You know, there's an artfulness that needs to be applied, even in technology, and I'm hearing this. So if we need institutions that really understand how to change that dynamic. That if we did, for example, we worked with, you know, ZKM, I'm interested in working with the tech industries and tech communities around Karlsruhe to change the way that we do technology. If we're going to really shape the way that AI is in our lives, we have to be in control of it and learn how to do that collectively as a society. So this change in the way of doing things artfully, of doing things with humanity, comes through art and cultural institutions, I believe. It's public institutions that should do this, should be part of this. But by just merely showing traditional avant-garde art on the walls is not going to do that job. So I want our spaces to be places of making and doing and learning and being together and convening and bringing different voices together so that they are actually contributing to society. They are helping make the kind of culture we want to live in. And for me, that's an active institution, not a passive one. And that's what I mean by it being useful, that it's contributing to the way the world develops in a very active, purposeful way.
Peter Weibel was very much against this. I remember this well. I remember that was a lot, but it was interesting. I think it's really a change, but it's really a change in the paradigm of the arts. I mean, we've been discussing this for last couple of years, and the interesting thing is that you two also simply with your biographies stand for this new and your formation stand for this new way of seeing art, right? That wasn't a question, but maybe you can still say something to that. That I mean, from the very beginning, you weren't persons that were just putting things on the wall, and that was it, right?
Actually, not on the wall, in the middle. The wall plays for us really like defining the territory and how can we not put the things on the wall but go through the walls. So I think it was important not to have a disciplinary focus but really think beyond it. So we used really technological moments of like how we can do it with the sound, how we can do it with performance. So kind of build a bridge between all of them, and to do that really long-term conversations with the artists, like now everybody's talking about, but artistic research means connection and long-term relationships. That's why we use the methodology of the theater, because in theater you have really long-term connections with the directors, the dramaturgs know the director, so you have every year an artist who is present. So this is, I think, it's important, which was not in contemporary art, except some big curators, to name Caroline Bakarjiev, who is working also mainly with same, always extending the artist list, but has connection. So this was our idea, to do these long-term relationships and try to develop something after 110 years in an old house, which is not internationally so much known, but locally one of the most important spaces, one of the most historical art institutions in Germany. So I think to implement there something new, which is not hanging on the wall, was our ideology, because we are not coming from these hanging on the wall. And that was a political decision, and I think this is important to tell it in this space. I think how we change the institutions is also very connected to the political visions, the people who choose us, and also convince the others that we do our job. If we want to continue on doing it, so it's not only 3 in Baden-Württemberg, it has to be more, because it has to become also a normality that we are not the only ones who are trying to establish something new. This is the A and B of art. If you show it every time the same, it becomes a museum. But the times are really different than being museal. So I think this interconnectivity for me means exactly that. And this came to our idea through Helga when we were sitting in Basel, in entrance of Art Basel, where millions of people are coming to see only one unique piece, and we are just next to it. 1 hour from Basel, and how do we connect? How do we connect with our audience, and how do we connect with the world? So I think this not hanging on the wall is a methodology. And that is, I think, what brings us together when we are doing an exhibition only based on sound and nothing to see. This can be very local, but also very global. So I think this is these moments where we can talk about also art, not only about politics or the methodology.
I mean, just for us as art critics, it's interesting because the format of the exhibition is changing so much, and for us it's difficult because in a way sometimes when everything is a process, like when do we come and look, and what is the basis of the text that we're writing? So that it's also interesting because it's like changing also the way we have to think about art, and maybe we have to, you know, because we only get, like it used to be like the exhibition is like, okay, people, like the curators make the exhibition, and then we see the exhibition and it's like, it's finished, you know, it's a finished work. But now, nothing's ever finished what you guys are doing.
I said, I want to say here, I want to do the press declaration at the end of the exhibition. And everybody said, are you crazy? Like, but it
you are.
I think we are not connected to this because the exhibitions are really developing in the making. Of course, there are moments. I think it's experiencing the moment of the beginning, the end, or the process. And these are the moments that we are searching for. How can we implement it in an exhibition space?
What's the dream exhibition like as a format? What kind of exhibitions do you envision? Or do you still call it exhibition?
I don't want to scare the horses if people from ZKM are watching.
I bet somebody.
I'm really interested in the idea of not doing exhibitions anymore.
I was suspecting you of this.
It's only been the delivery vehicle for art for 200 years. You know, human race has survived for a very long time without exhibitions. And of course, I love exhibitions and I like doing them and making them, but I think we have to problematize it because it is tied in with a particular strand of our, you know, our history and economics and power and politics and behavioral systems. And, you know, even, as you say, your journalism is based around the exhibition.
Yes.
Nobody writes around how an institution is working as a whole or how art is working in society.
Yeah.
So I think part of the changing the way, for me, I suppose it's a bit of a mission, is to change the way people understand art, and that has to start at like age 4 in schools. That we say, no, that art's something much more interesting than what we're telling you, and then it has this enormous power and ability to change the way we live. And so, in a way, I'd quite like to, imagine an institution in the future where ZKM is this place that is really dynamic and working with scientists and educators, and people are coming and going and using it as part of daily life. That would be my ultimate dream. You can still show art. It's not you don't do art anymore, but you use it and think about it in a different way. And fortunately, ZKM isn't an art gallery. It isn't a museum.
Yeah, right.
It's ZKM, so it can kind of be anything, which is rather nice. And it has this history of being a research and production house for all kinds of crazy ideas and working in technology, which is not in the traditions of the canon.
Mm. And also Kunsthalle Baden-Baden is not a museum, it doesn't have a collection, so that also gives you freedom, right?
It gives a big freedom, but at the same time, let's go back to 1837 when Paris was immediately filled with the first exhibition of fine arts and Salon Populaire. And also the interesting thing there was exposé, like making things public. What is an exhibition else than making things public? Thank you, Bruno Latour. I mean, in that sense, we need to maybe extend this vocabulary a bit, like exhibits in stalls can be part of our thinking. And at the Kunsthalle, what I love doing is it is different than an approach to any temporary exhibition space. I think our exhibitions are not stable forms. They are in transition. So you can imagine an exhibition with an entry, the main space with Neda Sadi, and locally super connected with where we are, politics of location. Let's say, imagine all the flora being investigated by an artist and turns into a glass architecture. And a couple of months later, Alexandra Prigi comes with her Terraform. It's very specific research about living forms. And then a performance starts there. I think that is the space defined between exhibition space and the stage. So borrowing these elements from theater and performative arts, like dramaturgy, dispositioning, scenography, because let's confess that we don't have the same power as we had before the pandemic. You know, we are not the most popular cultural sector anymore. So we don't...
The arts.
The arts. And because we don't meet on Friday as a pickup point as 300 people in one gallery anymore. We learned by name our audience. At 10:30, you come. I know if you are positive or negative COVID-19. So our relationship with the exhibition space changed. It's more like scenographic play. So we really need to leave a lot of space to audience's imagination. In this respect, I mean, I would definitely make the same choices today to create a collaboration, because Çağla generously brought not only an understanding of stage, but also I am more like this coming from curating background, this global player situation, and he really inserted certain elements of collectivity. And this interconnectedness cannot be thought of without collectivity, but at the same time, connectivity. You know, today we are talking about the centralization. I mean, Germany is very lucky. You have to unlearn your privilege, because literally Istanbul has all the art institutions on one street. We are not even talking about a city as the center of the culture in Turkey. We are talking about one street.
Okay.
So you have 250 institutions from Kunstvereins to Kunsthalles in the regional context. Regional funding is very important. You are not concerned about ticket sales. You know, we are free. If we don't invent the grammar of contemporary art, who can? And actually Germany does, we talked about it. I adore how context-sensitive approach is inserted here. You have Sculpturen Münster, you have Documenta, you have Ruhr Triennale. You don't have another biennial. And when it's another biennial like Berlin, we see what happens. So I think Germany is super inspiring with telling us, invent your own method. Be innovative, as Baden-Württemberg also tells us.
Baden-Württemberg, yes. Yeah, that's nice. I mean, that I think, for people coming from abroad, I think this federal system in Germany must really be also surprising and special, isn't it? In a way, with the local stakeholders. But talking of stakeholders, I mean, you're so euphoric about your freedom. Is there nobody bothering you ever?
Oh my God.
Of course.
all the time.
Yeah, Helga.
Okay, now what would be the moment?
Easter Sunday, working in office, a beautiful office from Heiko Sommernig, and someone comes and shouts and he wants the money back.
Why?
And I was because he didn't like the exhibition.
Okay, that's
I'm working
a good
on
idea.
Sunday as a director alone in the office, but this is a typical, like the very Baden-Baden, like they're really if they don't like it, they immediately want the money back. And I think I'm also getting a bit Baden-Baden when I'm really becoming. It's connected with the Berliner style, like they always say what they think.
Okay.
And so I think, but still, there is an appreciation. Like even in the critic, they take it as an appreciation. Like the negative critic is also something. It's bad if the people do not react to what they have seen. And so we take it really if it's 80%, then it's a problem. It's 50-50, it's okay.
So where are you, at 50-50?
Getting there.
Yeah, getting there. That's nice. And do you have like do you have stakeholders that you feel that are kind of like skeptical to your new approach to the museum, Alistair?
Yeah, of course. I mean, there's a whole, the history of ZKM is based on, a constantly changing story. It's not what it was when it started. And even when it started, it wasn't what it was supposed to be when people first had the first idea of ZKM. So you have to accept that these things constantly change and evolve. But of course, as you grow, you establish traditions, and ZKM is centered on this idea of media arts as a particular thing. But media arts itself has changed since 1988. Right. In 1988, the only place you could do media arts was somewhere like ZKM, well, 89, or these kind of media arts centers. Now everybody does media arts. So that means you can't be that same thing that you were. So you have to change. You have to adapt. And we have to have that conversation. And of course, there are people who don't want ZKM to change. And of course, there are people who would like it to do what works for them. That's what many stakeholders do. But you have to have that then as an open conversation about really who can get the most benefit from this? How can we run a public institution that is actually working in the way that it should work as something that is funded by the land and the city and by people who live in that region? So you have a responsibility to be relevant, and so therefore you have to change because the world changes. There are traditions you can take with you as well, and of course that's an important part of it, and to bring the best parts of your history and the best intentions. But yeah, I think there's a responsibility to change, and particularly ZKM, which was supposed to be a future-facing institution. It wasn't supposed to be looking over its shoulder all the time. The whole point of ZKM was to do something that was focused on new innovation, technology, the future and what's lying ahead of us. And if you're constantly, dragging your past with you, you're not going to be able to address those things in the same way.
I think you have to be also a bit more honest, because in a metropolitan context, you can develop a crowd, a supporter group, and you can just do your garden party in your own institutional framework, and everybody, this inter-institutional framework is still not as strong as there. You have to be honest to yourself when you operate in Baden-Baden, because the connections, conversations, relationships are very intense. Somebody can come to your face and say, I don't like your show. And it's a place between Truman Show and Pleasantville. So you live with these people every day. And you need to be honest to yourself and transparent to yourself, because your work has to be there, It's a different way of dealing with the anonymous audience. Our audience is not anonymous. We know our audience very well, and they know us very well. So this becomes another relationship. And this relationship for a curator, for a director, for an artist, it's hard.
And I think also we're very good in museums and galleries in the art world in deluding ourselves that everybody's interested in what we're doing.
Right.
Because we end up in thinking, that we're here in Berlin Art Week, and everybody goes, oh, that show you did was great, and oh, that's fantastic. But really, this is just, the art world is really about 273 people. Well, it's a bit more than that. But it's really, it's a bubble. And you have to be really, really conscious of that. And of course, like you say, you can maintain an institution, and it can be rooted actually in that old idea of audience, which is actually very old-fashioned as well, that there's you, the you, the museum, the institution, and this body of people out there, the audience, who are your regular users. And that might be your patrons group, your friends, the people who like going to see art. But there's a whole lot of people who aren't that. And I think that we have to address that. It's really, really important because it's a significant body of people. And if you kind of want art to change the world, it's no good just working with the same old people all the time. So I think it's important to change the idea of, well, move away from this language of audience, I think. And I think it's good to think about like multiple constituent groups for an institution who are all users. They're all engaged with an institution, even the people that work there. I'm part of that constituency of people, or school groups, or people who don't even go now. You know, ZKM has, in a way, has a usership, a constituency that's in all different regions of the world, or in Berlin, or even this week, you meet people who go, oh, ZKM, it's my favorite place. You know, that it's dispersed now. And this is also then very interesting in terms of the subject we're talking about, because it means that maybe we can have relationships with people in these different geographies in ways we never did as an institution. And they don't even, particularly with technology, you don't even have to come to the building anymore. You can, and that's one experience, but there are other ways. There are so many different cosmologies existing in the world out. There isn't one art world. There are many art worlds. And right. This is something that's really changed and something we have to adapt to.
Yeah, I was also going to ask you about the tools of interlocalism. Like how exactly do you do this? I mean, yeah, it's not the Instagram post, cannot be.
I would just wanted to tell something about that, because I want to ask, who has ever seen an exhibition in Kunsthalle Baden-Baden except the employees?
I have.
Wow. So it's not only Instagram. But I think we managed to do something, because not in the centers of like Frankfurt, Berlin, in periphery, I would say, in the sense Baden-Baden, which is not really on the way. The idea was to kind of establish a movement which doesn't come from the center, and which also doesn't come from the space, but has a connectivity with international communities, artist communities. It was not very important that they were based in Berlin, Baden-Baden. The idea was this global connection coming to a space in every forms, like not only analog but digital. So that's why, as a methodology, now I'm coming to your question slowly by slowly.
Yeah.
The idea was to change the programming from one-to-one, because Kunsthalle Baden-Baden is very famous for very important exhibition from very important artists, but very singular solo gestures. And if you want to establish a movement, then you have to be very plural. So we said, we name our program Singularities and Pluralities, and decided that we start with pluralities, which was a new language. That was what I was meaning. So we have started doing group exhibitions, which bring so many artists from all over the world, but talking about the same topics, which interests also the local. Our first poster, an exhibition, opened unluckily on the day of the big flood in North Rhine-Westphalia, and everybody thought this photo was from there. No, it was from a Kurdish city in South Turkey, which was flooded by a political decision that the dam destroyed all the Kurdish villages. So I think this image and how we connect, it exactly defines our idea how this global art protagonist can come to one point, analog, and think about these themes all together. I think this was actually the idea, but what we could do is how you transmit it, like who comes to Baden-Baden to see this, what we are doing. So long term, like in German, dehnen, das Programm would really stretch. So you do it in episodes, like state and nature comes again as nature and state, then comes as another, so as you have acts. So the idea was to establish 5 years of storytelling, always the same artist coming in different moments, but we have very specific teams also changing through the 5 years connected to the space. So we didn't say, we will do this, this, this. We stayed and talked, and I think it is interesting how we do this global and localize it. So this is I think what makes our work also very interesting, to be able to think about it. Just one notice. Actually, we are not presenting something very, like, it's not something we are doing very easily. Behind this like our 3.5 years, an incredible labor right movement, like a big political discussion, which we have been, it's like to implement that, we are fighting every day. It's not easy, it's not only the audience, it's the society, it's the politics, it's the Verwaltung. Every minute, every day, we are trying to, this is our truth, we want to establish this. It's like we are so happy doing that because we are committed, but it's not a Zuckerschnecke. We have to say that also. Like we are always saying, when we see the product, of course, everybody likes it. But the way onto that is really 24 hours work, 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 and try to establish that. So I think we have to also acknowledge all the colleagues and the artists who are devoted to this and change the world, not only Baden-Baden and Baden-Württemberg outside the Berlin, but also the politics.
And what about your tools to achieve this interlocalism?
Well, obviously with ZKM, technology and media is pretty central to this.
Yes.
And it's and also I think it's as I say a lot, it's the sea we're swimming in. And actually, it then actually becomes common currency. If you think about the technology that's in use now, again, this is not, technology is no longer something that's centered in Silicon Valley or even just in Baden-Württemberg. It's happening, the interesting developments in technology are happening in small communities in Colombia. They're happening in Lagos, in Bangalore, in all these different geographies in really interesting ways. This is the way the world is now operating, and how a lot of artists or people working artistically are operating. So for me, I mean, the technology is key as a kind of a language and a shared resource now. I mean, in a way, it's a bit like, we always talk about food being the most common language in culture, and that's a given. But I think now also technology is as well, and in all its various forms, whether that's coding or software or AI or the hardware itself. So I think it's an incredibly useful and interesting platform for me, because also it's outside of that language of the traditions of art, of the artistic canon. Still, I mean, of course it gets pulled in, and there is a canon of media arts and so on and so forth that's very much part of the art world. But there's also, that also has its roots in the space which was people working outside and in the streets and in the world with the new technologies that were emerging. So for me, that's a really key part of it. And now it does allow us to be working directly with all these different communities and different places who have shared concerns. They're different contexts, but it's incredibly then important to connect, like the Saraceno web, these different constituencies of people who are all facing similar problems but in different contexts, and sharing knowledge to learn from one another. And technology is now allowing that. And what it also does is it creates what I call a cognitive diversity, which is also very important in terms of surviving and adapting in the world, and in terms of fighting some of the challenging politics we have around as well, which comes from the growth of monocultures and polarization. So I see in a very positive sense that these kind of technological tools have allowing the conversations to happen. And it's dialogue that is also one of the most important tools as well.
Mm. It's nice to hear something positive about technology, actually, because, on the other hand, like platform capitalism doesn't make it easy to see things diverse and to get into a dialogue. I mean, people seem to get more in fights than in dialogues. So how do you go around this algorithm problems? Like because you know, like when you start engaging in the big platforms, in the social media platforms, also, I mean, you need channels also to connect. But then you're in the hands of platform capitalism, aren't you?
No, not necessarily, because you don't have to use social media.
Okay.
That's not the only communication network. You know, and we're seeing this now. A lot of people are just dropping out of the equation. You can still communicate with technology and not be a social media addict, or to rise to that. So I think, and actually quite the opposite as well. I mean, of course that happens, and we live in an attention economy, but we also have the tools available to us to work in other ways. And actually, one of my other great hopes is, one of the great failings of recent history is humanity's inability to imagine another operating system other than capitalism. And in the technology we have now, particularly with blockchain and DAOs and things like this, that there's the seeds there of actually creating a different kind of operating system that creates, a kind of a more level platform. So, of course, like all tools, it's how you use them, not what the tools are.
Mm.
I mean, I would borrow the old saying, art cannot change the world, but it can switch our perspectives, because for us, we accept the fact that Baden-Baden is not only in Germany. It is on the planet. So it brings a certain level of universality to our lives. And as curators, as artists, we also believe in this fluxus moment of art. We believe that there's a universality that we share. There's a frame of the universe. So I think that is important for us, but as tools for building these relationships, for connecting with our audiences, I think we really follow a very transdisciplinary approach in terms of literature, poetry, science, basically a lot of nerds who are dealing with a lot of very tiny little things are our focus group. We love people who are interested in things that are not online, that are not digital, that are not in the form of capitalist circulation. So I think we also find ourselves responsible from this caring. And it's building relationships. You have only one tool, and in order to approach it, you have to extend your capacity, and sometimes it's not easy.
Mm. Fine, we were talking about involving the audience, and so I think it's finally time also here for involving the audience. We have microphones, and we are happy to take some questions. So if you have questions, please come forward and join our dialogue, if there's anything. There is a question. Press the microphone. There it comes.
Thank you very much for this wonderful panel and discussion. My name is Nathalie Neumann. I'm in another bubble. I'm a provenance researcher at the University of Mainz, which is provenance research is a historical research on property. But I'm working with the great son of the family, Felix Ganz, and he is a media researcher and developer. And what he did with our research is he created with ScanLab, which Alistair might know from London. ScanLab is a multimedia, state-of-the-art startup company based in London who was working with music festivals but also with museums. Adam Ganz created Felix Room, which was prized in Germany. So it's, I don't even know how to name it, an installation working with multimedia, very modern, and in a theater scene. And now we try to get it from the capital, which was shown in Berlin, to the Ländle, and so we have the problem, we would like to bring it to Mainz. So are you working also interregional? Could we have advice how to get it to Mainz and maybe even to Freiburg, because there's connections over there? And unfortunately, the capital world is still existing. This costs a lot of money. So who would be partners on site? Thank you very much.
Okay, you're looking for business partners, maybe.
We haven't thought that here is an open call for projects, but
Okay. Okay, that was an open call. I mean, if somebody is interested, he can approach you after the panel, maybe.
Well, that's the beauty of these networks. Is that you can have these conversations, and it is an open network. Although we are having this conversation in Berlin, so it took Berlin to facilitate it.
No funds in Berlin. Here's a question.
Hello, thank you for the really inspiring conversation. My name is Gabi Schöpper and I'm a journalist. And I wanted just to know, what is your USP if interlocalism is the new internationalism? So why should I go to Kunsthalle Baden-Baden, maybe next month, or to ZKM? So what experience could you offer me there, which I cannot get digital?
You have to come to Baden-Baden because we are going to present a fantastic major comprehensive show by Sarkis. And Sarkis is a legendary artist who thinks a lot about art as a living form. It's not only a form that's limited in the gallery space, that's a metacognition that transmits this experience to your life. So if you want to close that gap between art and life, you have to visit Kunsthalle Baden-Baden. I think if you want to close that gap, we are the right place. Sarkis, come and visit us with the Sarkis show on the 27th of October. We are opening.
Yeah, and I think, for ZKM, you can experience it online, you can experience it remotely, but there's a particular, even with technology and media arts and so on, there's a certain texture to it. There's an environment, an atmosphere that it creates that is very different from anything you will see here in Berlin, for example. If the building of ZKM is very important. The collection is very important. The way we do things is very different. The approach, the language, the situation of Karlsruhe itself. Karlsruhe is the sunniest city in Germany.
Is it?
Well, maybe Freiburg will challenge that, but no one here from Freiburg. The place of Karlsruhe, of Baden-Württemberg, is very particular. And the incongruousness of somewhere like ZKM being in somewhere like Karlsruhe is rather extraordinary as well. So you don't just come and experience ZKM, you experience ZKM operating in its environment and having that interplay. And with these extraordinary technological industries and researchers and academics and publics who are very, very different. You get to experience the Badische accent, for example, which is a cultural experience in its own right, I believe. So there are many, many reasons, but it is about the texture of experience and actually meeting people you wouldn't ordinarily meet. And I think that for me this is very important as well, that when you come to these places, you experience and you meet people and ideas and things that you wouldn't get anywhere else. If I go to any institution around Berlin, there is nowhere like ZKM.
Obviously.
And so if you want to experience something else, then come to Karlsruhe and then get on the train for 15 minutes and go to Baden-Baden. You do 2 in 1 then.
I think if we haven't waked any curiosity, then you should not come. Because I think that was also the idea. I think the institutions are kind of organisms, and how we define it as the directors of the institutions and how we implement new organisms in this long-term living organisms is also like we go in there and kind of shape with our ideas. So I think it's important if there are these new positions and trying something new, I think it would be interesting also to have different audience else than the regional. So that is our also aim. So it would be great if you all join this kind of research and long-term dedication.
And also, I think I'd add that it's important to come and see how the world works in different ways. Most of the world does not look like metropolitan cities. Most of the world looks like small cities, towns, suburbs, countryside, rural environments. I think, and for me, I think it's much more interesting to see art and media arts and culture working in a whole range of different environments. And I think you don't experience that. I mean, of course, Berlin is wonderful. Of course it is, and we all enjoy coming here. But I think it's also good to experience a different version of what culture is, because most of the world is not like here.
Okay, I think that was a good that was a good point. I think we will all see each other in Karlsruhe. We will all see each other in Baden-Baden next time. And I have to thank my wonderful panel for this great talk. I thank you to the audience. Thank for everybody who listened. And I wish you a great day and enjoy today Berlin and another time Karlsruhe and Baden-Baden. Thank you.